Hi, Deacon Ed McCormick here on this warm, late July day. And today in this video, I want to do a book review of this fabulous book that I have just finished. The title of the book is An Unfinished Love Story, and it's written by Doris Kearns Goodwin, one of our great American historians. She's a Pulitzer Prize winner. She's written books on JFK, Lyndon Johnson. She won the Pulitzer for her fabulous book on Lincoln called The Team of Rivals. And I've just finished this recent book of hers. It's a fabulous story, and I think it's very important for our own time, as many of the very important and prized dimensions of our society are now under attack. The way the book is written, Kearns frames the story with two stories. One is the meeting of her husband, Dick Goodwin, when she is a young professor at Harvard teaching history. And then the story ends with she and her husband going through boxes upon boxes of all this memorabilia that he has accumulated over the years. And then it ends with his eventually getting sick and dying. So it really is framed as a love story. But what it frames is this incredible story of the career of her husband, Dick Goodwin, who was one of the greatest speechwriters in American history. He was the main speechwriter for John F. Kennedy. He was the main speechwriter for Lyndon Baines Johnson and his promotion of civil rights and all the anti-poverty legislation and the Great Society legislation. He was also a speechwriter and very close friend of Bobby Kennedy. And he also wrote Al Gore's acceptance speech many, many years later. And so this is an incredible story. And as Doris Kearns Goodwin and Dick Goodwin went through these boxes that contained drafts of speeches and letters and diaries, insider material from JFK and Jackie Kennedy and Lady Bird Johnson and Lyndon Johnson and Bobby Kennedy and many others. Kearns puts this together, and so you read this book and you feel like you are inside the White House. You feel like you're inside the Kennedy campaign as he's first running for office as a senator. You're in the White House with JFK, and you're there in the White House hearing the death of Kennedy. You're there in the White House as LBJ struggles to promote civil rights legislation and anti-poverty legislation. And in many cases, it's the brilliant speechwriting of Dick Goodwin that Doris Kearns recounts in this book that is what promotes Congress and the American people to support this transformative legislation. And I'm telling you about this because I think in our day, a lot of the legislation that was made possible by Dick Goodwin's speeches is now under threat. So I just want to identify for you some of the crucial legislation that Lyndon Baines Johnson passed with the help of Dick Goodwin's speeches. First of all, he began the Head Start program. It was Johnson who began to fund early education for low-income children. He promoted and passed the Food Stamp Act so that food assistance could be given to low-income families. He started Medicare. It was Johnson who passed the legislation that allowed for the health insurance of people over 65. It was Johnson who promoted Medicaid, the federal program, the federal and state program that provides health care for low-income families. And of course, it was Johnson who passed the Civil Rights Act in 1964, banning this landmark legislation, eliminated discrimination in all forms, which had been the standard practice in this country against African Americans. And then in 1965, he passed the landmark Voting Rights Act, which ensured voting rights for all African Americans, because before this, there were all kinds of obstacles thrown in the way of African Americans to vote, especially in the South. And then he passed the Housing and Urban Development Act in 1965, establishing HUD and expanding public funding for housing for the poor. In addition, he passed the National Endowment for the Arts and Humanities, public funding supporting artistic and cultural projects. It's really an astonishing set of legislative achievements that were passed by Lyndon Baines Johnson and made possible because of the speeches written by Dick Goodwin. And in this magnificent book, she often leaves you with some parts of those speeches, and you can see how beautiful and brilliant they were. And I'm sharing with you and promoting this book. I encourage you to read it. It's a beautifully written book, easy to read, incredibly informative. But I'm telling you about this book because we live in a time where many of these great society legislative achievements are under attack. Voting rights is under attack. Right now we're watching the big bad bill attacking Medicaid and Medicare. The arts are under attack. Head Start's under attack. And so by reading this book, you can understand the legislative achievement, but also appreciate what this country was like before there was a Civil Rights Act and a Voting Rights Act, before there was Head Start and HUD and all these other legislative achievements. So if you're looking for a good read at this point in the summer, I cannot say enough about Doris Kearns Goodwin's fabulous book called An Unfinished Love Story. See you in the next video.